today I'd like to tell you, or rather show you a certain amount of documents related to the early period of existence of the gas chambers in Birkenau, which were called Bunker 1, Bunker 2. Because it was about a year ago when we in the museum, namely me and Mr. Igor Bartosik and Łukasz Martyniak, decided that it would be nice to have a useful, more or less complete set of documents with entries about the existence of Sonderkommando, this early period, because there is a general lack of sources for 1942, for spring 1943. Just a few testimonies, particularly for the year of 1942. We have no testimonies by members of Sonderkommando because they were killed. They all were killed in December. Only few testimonies of those Jews who drove to Sonderkommando in December. That might be a good point for making a comparison with these testimonies, as well as with the statements by the, let's say, older generation of the Auschwitz historians, namely Mr. Franciszek Piper and Danuta Czech. This set of documents will constitute of about 80 records. Most of them had never been published, and for sure they have never been published in Poland yet. Let me begin with the first period of the killing operations in Auschwitz. When we know about it, we've got about 100 testimonies by survivors collected by Mr. Stanisław Chybiński several years ago, many years ago, and a statement by Mrs. Danuta Czech about the date of this first killing, which took place more or less around the 3rd of September 1941. That was because Mrs. Czech found a gap in the register of the bunker. I would say there was a sort of a prison in the camp. When these gassings, the killing took place in the basement of this building. So for the couple of days, there were no admissions to the bunker. So she believed that that was the moment in time when these Soviet prisoners of war and over 200 patients from the camp hospital were murdered in this block by the gas, Cyclone B. What else? We have some contemporary sources. First of all, the reports of the Polish underground. The illegal messages were being sent from the camp by the members of the resistance organization to Warsaw, and then edited by the soldiers, members of the headquarters of the Home Army there. So this is one of these reports. These reports, of course, they are not fully credible. There are some mistakes, some omissions. Nevertheless, there's a first report that reached Warsaw about the killing by gas in Auschwitz. It was in October 1941. Then it was a form of a press release or something like that, prepared for the to be used by the editors of the underground press in Poland. The more precise data is given here, and the number of I don't know why civil Soviet prisoners of war. There were normal Russian POWs who were brought to Auschwitz and murdered in block number 11, together with 250 Poles, the patients from the hospital. But we have also other sources, the illegal letters, private letters that were sent out from the camp by the prisoners, or the witnesses, to their families. And for instance, in this one, there's a description of this killing of the Soviet prisoners of war in block number 11. And as the author stated that this happened 2 weeks before the half of September 1941. So more or less at the beginning of September 1941. And a similar description of this killing, and then another letter, very emotional letter to the family of the prisoner, in which it was the process of killing was described, how these people, the Russian prisoners of war, were driven to block number 11 and then murdered. The bodies were transported then to the crematorium. What is more important, I believe, there's a German document in which we can find a date, with the 25th of September 1941, and the information that's actually the order for the camp Schlosserei, for the camp locksmith's workshop. The order for making 4 gas-tight covers, 4 luftdichte Klappen, for the building which was called Bauwerk number 11. So that was a crematorium number 1. So it was probably a reference to this action we can find in the testimony by Rudolf Höss, commander of Auschwitz, in which he stated that sometime after the first test killing of the Soviet prisoners of war, another group of 900 Soviets was murdered in the bunker, in the part of the crematorium building, which was actually the morgue, Leichenkammer, Keller. So that was probably, this happened probably immediately after these luftdichte Klappen had been prepared in the Kampfschlosserei. Yes. And another reported by the Polish resistance movement about the killing of 500 prisoners, these numbers may vary, who were murdered with a gas in a concrete bunker, not in the basement of block number 11, but in the separate concrete bunker. That means that it was most probably these people were murdered in the building of the crematorium number 1 in Auschwitz. Bunker number 1 in Birkenau, there's a problem with the old Polish historiography, which is based on the statements by Danuta Czech. We are very careful with the book by Danuta Czech, and particularly some of her statements were based on her the general knowledge, general understanding of the fact that, of the history of the camp, as it was the case of the beginning of killing operations in Birkenau. She gave in his famous calendar, Chronicle of Auschwitz, the date of the 20th of, or around the 20th of March 1942. That means probably that she used testimony by Rudolf Höss, who stated that these killing operations began more or less at the beginning of the spring. So that was the beginning of the spring, the 21st of March. But surprisingly, I think it's possible to confirm the statement by Danuta Czech in some other sources. First of all, there is, you can see on this diagram, the temperatures that prevailed in Auschwitz and in Cracow in the fall of 1941 and the beginning of 1942. You can see that it was only in the end of March when the temperatures were higher than the 0 degrees centigrade, because and therefore the digging, the trenches, digging the mass graves in Birkenau, I think it was not possible. So these actions, this killing operations in Bunker 1 could not be done before the end of March 1942. Then we have a very useful and very important testimony by Wiesław Kielar, a Polish prisoner who was a member of the Sonderkommando from Auschwitz. And he stated that it was a group of Jewish prisoners who were used by the Germans for transportation of the bodies from the gas chamber in Birkenau to the trench, to the grave. And after completing this work, these Jews were taken to Auschwitz and murdered in block number 20 with a hard injection. So he said that this crime took place after the transfer of the Soviet prisoners of war to Birkenau, that it was in the mid-March 1942, and before arrival of the first transport of women to the camp, the Jewish prisoners from Slovakia. So within more or less 10 days, then the document with information about the organization of these transports to arrival of the first group of Slovak women to Birkenau. Another important document, testimony by Stanisław Chybiński, a Polish prisoner who escaped from Birkenau, and he wrote a report about his experiences in the camp. So he was giving more or less the same date. That was the moment of opening and the beginning of construction works of the first sector of the camp in Birkenau, more or less in March 1942. And then something completely new, and the precise date given by Mr. Wiesław Kielar, deserter from the German army, who was a prisoner in Auschwitz. It was a group of Polish political prisoners who were released from Auschwitz when they decided to accept a German national list, the Volksliste. And usually, a few days after they were released from Auschwitz, they were conscripted to the German army. In many cases, however, almost immediately after they reached the front line, they deserted from the army, and some of them were investigated by the British or American officers. So that was this testimony from 1944. I don't know if this date is credible or not, fully credible or not. Nevertheless, is still within this period of 10 days between this period given us by Mr. Wiesław Kielar. Then a document, an order from to prepare 2 iron hooks for opening the windows for Abteilungsvergasungstruppe. This document is dated on 27th of March 1942. So if we assume that this date given by Mr. Wieczorek is right, so that might be a result of first experiences of the guards who were responsible for these gassing operations. They most probably decided that it would be useful to have such Eisenhaken to open the windows of the first gas chamber in the little red house. This Kistenöffner, that was probably the hammer and this device which was used for making immediately large holes in the canisters of Cyclone B. If you ever have opportunity to visit the Auschwitz Museum, you will see that almost all these canisters had the same regular openings. Then another document from April 1942, the first, I believe, document in which the name of Sonderkommando in Birkenau was mentioned for the first time. This document states that 300 kilograms of cement was delivered for Sonderkommando Birkenau and 400 kilograms of calc. Then, as we know that it was already the gas chamber and it was Sonderkommando, the first confirmed fact of killing Jews from the mass transports from Slovakia. As we know, initially there was a plan to send to Auschwitz the transports. Each of them should consist of 1,000 people. And more or less that was done until the 29th of April, when for the first time there's a difference between the number of the deportees and number of Jews who were registered in the list of newly arrivals to the camp. There's a difference of the gap of about more than 200 people. What happened to these people? That is the question. So the answer might be found in the list of newly arrivals. We have here, this is a selection of the names following the dates of birth. We can see here that on the bottom, that the youngest man, a child, a little boy, who was registered, he was born in 1930, so he was 12 years old at the moment of his registration. And again, if you look at the date of birth of the oldest prisoners who were registered on this day, you can see that there were some elderly prisoners. One of them is born in 1859. So he was, well, 83. So in my opinion, such old people were completely useless for the SS, for the purpose of using them as workers. So that's the question why, in this particular moment, in this particular transport, such old people might survive the selection, might survive the admission to the camp. So, in my opinion, that was even the problem for the guards, for the administration of the camp. They, for the first time, were confronted with such a problem. What to do with the transport in which there were children and elderly people. So they reacted in such a way. As we can see on this testimony of a Jewish prisoner, the woman from this transport, she stated that suddenly ženy z dětmi od nás oddalili. This is in Czech. That the women, the mothers with the children, suddenly were taken out from the group, and then they disappear. So most probably this was the moment of the first selection of the regular transport organized by the main security office of the Reich. And this practice, the selecting of younger children than the 12 years old, was confirmed in the reports by the Polish resistance movement. You can see here that in the report from June 1942, the young boys under the age of 12 are conscripted together into the block, just the girls and the elderly. Under the age of 12 and the children are not accepted but killed immediately. And again, another statement by the Polish prisoner who said that Jewish children were being murdered in June 1942 without mercy in the camp. Apart from those Jews who were murdered and selected out from the transfer from Slovakia and then also from France and Holland, these were the transports of Polish Jews who were not selected at all in Auschwitz. They were all being murdered in gas chambers. In case of Auschwitz, we have no confirmation of this fact, but there is a very important document from the administration of the ghettos in Upper Silesia, in the so-called Zagłębie Basin. We can see here the statistics of those Jews who were in these ghettos in May 1942 and 3 months later in October 1942. There's a difference, there's a gap of about 20,000 Jews who disappeared somehow from the statistics of the ghetto administration. So we now know that these people were sent to Auschwitz and as being considered as being not fit for work, were murdered in gas chambers of bunker number 1. What about bunker number 2? There is an entry to the Danuta Czech calendar, Chronicle of Auschwitz, that the second gas chamber in the bunker number 2 was opened in the end of June. We believe now rather that it happened a few days later because there is another order for making, for installing the doors to the gas chamber, the second gas chamber in Birkenau, and the date is given as the 8th of July, so then a few days later. Then, for the first time, there's an order for preparing gas masks for the Vergasungsräumen in the camp for the POWs in Birkenau. Because we know that it cannot be the case of the delousing chambers that were open many months later, so that must be the case of the gas chambers for killing people, so-called bunkers. Okay? And another set of documents with information about the beginning of burning the bodies, excavations of the old graves, old mass graves in Birkenau. Danuta Czech believed that it happened more or less in the middle of September. Now we know that the beginning of the action should be dated as more or less the 1820s of August. For instance, in this document we can see that a group of about 500 prisoners, I would say regular prisoners from the concentration camp, was sent to Sonderkommando, most probably for digging the trenches, digging the burning pits. And it was on the 18th of August. Then, Arbeitskarte, the report about the works that had been done in Birkenau, in which we can see that, that it was to be electric cable put to provide the light for 19 burning pits in Birkenau. So that was the moment when the Germans decided to work, to burn the bodies 24 hours a day, all night long also. Then the name of Sonderkommando appeared again in the request from the Gefangeneneigentumsverwaltung, for the administration of the property of the Jews deported to Auschwitz, in which they asked for supplying the existing Sonderkommando with 50 more prisoners, probably because there was the bigger scope of work foreseen for Sonderkommando. Then there is a famous document from the Engineer Prüfer visit to Auschwitz, in which there's mention about Badenanstalten für Sonderaktionen, the facility, bathing facilities for special actions. It was also in August 1942. And then the request for sending more tracks for Auschwitz because of Sonderaktionen. The tracks were necessary for transportation of elderly Jews and children for the ramp of the old Jewish platform to the bunkers, to the gas chambers in Birkenau, because of the new tasks and increasing the number of Jews being sent to Birkenau. The administration of a concentration camp need to have more tracks. Then there's an interesting report from the Obergruppenführer Oswald Pohl visit to Auschwitz in September 1942, with a careful description of the road of his inspection. At the beginning, he had a breakfast or a lunch in the Haus der Waffen-SS next to the train station in Auschwitz. And then he went to see the concentration camp and the slaughterhouse, Fleischerei. It was here. Then he went to visit the concentration camp, the Stammlager, and the new laundry. So that must have been this road of his car. And then, which is more interesting, he visited Bauhof, the factory of the AEW. It was a factory of certain wooden elements of furniture, windows, whatever. And then finally he also visited Entwässung und Effektenkammer Aktion Reinhardt. So the only thing that might be called in this way on the road of his visit, it was so-called Canada No. 1, but it was a delousing installation and storehouses for keeping the clothes, suitcases, all the valuable things seized from the transports of Jews being murdered in Birkenau. So Entwässung installations, delousing installations of Aktion Reinhardt. And finally, the only thing then, what he could see in Birkenau, after seeing Birkenau, which was called Station 2 der Aktion Reinhardt, that was the bunker number 2 of Operation Reinhardt, namely the killing of the Jews in Birkenau. Okay? Then the document was published also in several places, but it's also very interesting and crucial for this subject. The map of the Interessengebiet, the zone of interest of concentration camp, with this, with the Sperrgebiet. It was the name of the place when the bodies of the Jews murdered in gas chambers were being buried until 1943. Sorry. Okay. We have also many documents from not only from the political division of the camp, not only from the Bauleitung collection, but also from the administration division, administration of the camp, related to the supplying the concentration camp with certain materials that were necessary for the destruction process, for killing people in the gas chambers and the burning the bodies. Some of them refer to this period of existence of the old gas chamber and old crematorium in Auschwitz, even for 1940. Then for July in 1941, we have the precise report about deliveries of coal and coke. The coke was used in crematorium, like this. And for the years 1941, 40, 42, you can see that gradually the number of transports, of deliveries of coke was higher and higher month after month. And also you can see on the diagram that deliveries of coke for the crematorium in Auschwitz, crematorium in Auschwitz was bigger and bigger. Between 3 or 2 tons daily. And unfortunately, in case of deliveries of coke to crematorium in Birkenau, there are many gaps in the documentation. Nevertheless, we may see that the consumption of coke in Birkenau was much higher. That reached 10 tons or even more on average. The aerial photograph of the coke deposits in Auschwitz and the photograph taken by the Soviets in 1942, then about the woods. I'm afraid, how much time I have? 5 minutes or something?
5 minutes.
Okay. We know we have a number of confirmation of the trips of the SS tracks to Radostowitz and some other places in the Pszczyna forests. And the reason for that, it was the delivery of wood for burning bodies. Jews in Birkenau forest, which is interesting. There is a number of confirmations of such trips for the early September 1942, to Radostowitz, for instance, in this case, and then there is a gap. It was a moment when probably Hus came to the conclusion that he had no sufficient experience with constructing of the insemination in the burning pits, so it would be good to talk with somebody who have the better experience, namely Mr. Paul Bobel from Kulmhof, and it was why he asked for the car, and the car was given to him. He made such a trip with two other officers to Chełmno, and it was written in this order: nach Liesmann, Stadt und zurück, zwecks Besichtigung der Versuchsstation für Aktion Reinhardt, for visiting of the experimental station of field furnaces of Aktion Reinhardt. So he was there, he was instructed by Blobel, and he came back to Auschwitz, and then we have a series of trips of the camp tracks to these forests in Pszczyna. And then finally, just few documents about Sonderkommando, which were found in different collections of the Auschwitz archive. For instance, there is a note about the existence of two Sonderkommandos in Auschwitz. Most probably one was used for burning the bodies by the bunker number 1, and the second by the bunker number 2. Another document in which Sonderkommando number 2 was mentioned, December 42. Then that is necessary to send two more guards to Sonderkommando, January 1943. That is necessary to send dentists for Sonderaktionen in February 1943. Then another document with the name of the second Sonderkommando, February 1943. Sonderkommando. The conscription of the numerous trips of Sonderkommando members to different localities around the camp. Most probably they were busy with collecting of different pieces of wood from the Polish houses, Polish farm houses that were partly destroyed after the expulsion action of evacuation of the Poles from the Auschwitz area in 1941. Let me skip this once. This is again something new. Very precise information about the deliveries of Cyclone B to Auschwitz, with the content of these deliveries: 3,000 kilograms of Cyclone in 1941, more than almost 3.5 tons of Cyclone in September 1942, and so on, and many other reports which seems to be more or less complete and gives an idea how much gas was sent to Auschwitz altogether in 1942, 1943, which was used primarily for killing people in the gas chambers. Thank you.